Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Joanne Casey with the Career and Professional Development Center. Welcome to today's program on If I Knew Then What I Know Now, Understanding Different Law Firm Opportunities. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Meg Wager and Colleen O'Byrne, who are here today. And I'd like to introduce our speakers just very briefly because I'm going to have them tell you all about their incredible careers, and I want to thank them all for taking time out of their busy days to be here and hopefully answer some of your questions about the recruiting process, different law firms, and how their journeys, how you can benefit from hearing about their journeys. So today we have Michael D. Simone from the class of 2008, who's Vice President and Corporate Counsel at Prudential. Gabriella Levine from the class of 2017, who's an associate with Whiteman, Osterman, and Hanna. Francesca McGuire from the class of 2019, who's an associate at Mintz, Levin, Cohn, Ferris, Glovsky, and Papeo. And then we have Arlene Newton, who's class of 2009, who's a counsel with Skadden, Arp, Slate, Meager, and Flom, LLP. So thank you all for joining us. So I'd like to start by having you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, the type of work you're doing at the firm, maybe a little bit about the type of clients you have. And if you can explain a little bit about your firms, I want students to get a sense of the different types of law firms. So, for Michael and Francesca, you can talk about the firms, that you previously worked at and where you're working now, and maybe give a little explanation about what an AM Law 100 firm, what that means, and things like that. So, Michael, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thanks so much, Joanne. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. So I went to Albany Law School, like Joanne said. I graduated in 2008. I was actually part of the 3-3 program through SUNY Albany and Albany Law School. I majored in criminal justice at SUNY, and then I summered in 2007 at White & Case in Manhattan, and then I was hired as a commercial litigation associate immediately thereafter. And I was at White & Case for about 7.5 years, where I worked on, I represented generic pharmaceutical manufacturers, primarily in litigation in state courts concerning price reporting, pharmaceutical price reporting. I got a great experience there. I got to also go to the U.S. Supreme Court at one point. I ran a trial in Mississippi for 3 weeks. It was just a great experience. I really enjoyed it. And then in 2015, I moved in-house to MetLife, and I was there for 2.5 years as a corporate counsel supporting the long-term care business. And then in 2018, I had the opportunity to come where I am now at Prudential. Been there about 4 years, and I support the group life insurance business as a corporate counsel. I do a lot of work with third-party compensation. I do a lot of work with underwriting, and I also do support the long-term care business as well. As far as what is AM Law 100, my understanding is AM Law 100 is a ranking of the top 100 law firms by revenue, and it sort of varies by year, but that's what I understand it to be.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Arlene, would you like to go next, please?
Sure, thank you. And thanks again for including me on today's panel. It's always great to connect with the Albany Law community. So I'm Marlee Newton. I graduated from Albany Law in 2009. And I went to the firm where I summered in 2008, Skadden. And I've been there since then. So this is my 13th year practicing. And I'm a counsel in the Trust and Estates group there. And in my practice, I represent high net worth families in their estate and gift tax planning, both lifetime planning with gifting and trusts for their family, as well as estate administration. So where I'm at Skadden, my group is pretty small. There's about 9 attorneys in my group, but we are part of a very large corporate-based law firm. It is part of the AmLaw 100. I think it's like top 5 or 10. So it's a very high-level practice, a lot of the kind of cross-selling and cross-working with other, practices in my group, such as tax, real estate, investment management, because a lot of our clients, their wealth comes from either like New York real estate, financial services, like hedge funds, principals, and private equity principals. and other types of like wealth generating businesses. So it's been a really great experience at Skadden, and in the trust and estates group in particular. It's been an interesting practice because if anyone has taken or will be taking trust and estates, it's really an interesting practice area. It's something that can be done for people who have very little assets, up to people who are billionaires. So I think it's a really stable and really exciting practice. And I was really honored that I had the opportunity to work at Skadden as a summer associate and also come in that group. And it's been a pretty interesting ride since then.
Thank you, Arlene. Gabriella is with one of, I think, the largest law firm here in Albany. So, Gabriella, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. Thank you, Joanne, for having me. I'm excited to be on the panel. My name is Gabriella Levine. I graduated from Albany Law in 2017, and I currently work as a litigation associate in my 5th year at Whiteman, Osterman, and Hannah. This is where I did my summer back in law school, and I've stayed here ever since. Whiteman is definitely not an AmLaw, firm. We're a regional presence in upstate New York. We're only a solo office. We are, with that being said, the largest firm in this area. Whiteman was always described to me in law school as having like a BigLaw feel to it without actually being in BigLaw, and just in terms of the size of the firm and the amount of practice areas that we offer. I think that's probably where the similarities sort of end, though. Like I said, we're a full service firm. So while I'm in litigation, we do offer all different types of practice areas. My practice in particular is mostly in commercial litigation. So I've done everything from business divorce, which can sometimes be as ugly as regular divorce, shareholder derivative suits. I do like a lot of land use and development litigation as well. My practice has been a little bit more general, although in recent years, I think I've started to trend more toward the commercial area of litigation. I think that's about it.
Thank you. Francesca, can you share with us your journey so far?
Hi, and thank you again, Joanne, for having me. I'm Francesca McGuire. I graduated from Albany Law in 2019, and I started at Cahill Gordon in the city. That's also where I summered. I started as a litigation associate, and then when I came back to join the firm full-time, I switched to the corporate practice. So I was mostly focused on finance and capital markets. And then in March, I lateraled and I came to Mintz, which I feel like this is kind of perfect for the AM 100 discussion, because I was recently told a couple months ago that Mintz is actually kind of a rising star. They weren't even in the AM Law 100 until the last couple years. And I think it's definitely based on revenue, but I think some other things that come up when people are talking about the AM Law 100 are the types of clients, either like high net worth individuals, institutional clients, like banks, like think JP Morgan, Barclays, Citi, and think maybe Fortune 500 companies, and then also size, and then salary. There's a market that the AM Law 100 typically follows. And so I joined Mintz, and I'm in the capital markets group here, which is a little bit different than what I was doing at Cahill. At Cahill, I was doing capital markets and finance, but finance was making me a little unhappy. And I think that's a perfect example of it's never too late to switch and try different things in your career. And also Cahill's capital markets practice is very debt focused. They're very highly ranked and very highly regarded for debt capital markets, but I also wanted to get some experience with equity. And for anyone who doesn't know, just to quickly explain, there are usually 3 ways that a public company can raise money. So it starts with finance. So traditionally, just think of like how you or I would get like a mortgage or a student loan. that's available to public and private companies. And then there's capital markets, which is debt. Think like a bond deal, notes offering, and then equity. So it's either selling debt in your company, or you're gonna be selling shares, which is literally ownership of your company. And what I wanted to do was equity. And that's pretty much almost exclusively what I'm doing at Mint now. And in terms of types of clients, I also wanted to focus on more being company side, emerging companies, startups, smaller companies that are being acquired are what I'm really interested in. And at Cahill, the institutional clients that we were working with, like the banks, I enjoyed that, but I definitely wanted to expand what I was able to do. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, all of you. And I think we've seen, the array of different things that each of our panelists are doing. We've seen two of our panelists make a move from their original summer associates and where they started careers, and then two of our panelists who are still with their current employers, but taking on maybe different types of clients and roles while they're there. So I think that's important for students as they're beginning to make this decision, whether it's for the summer or for after graduation, that sometimes what you start off doing isn't what you continue to do, whether you leave your employer or stay with your employer. So thank you all for sharing your stories. So now I want to ask the question, many of our students now are thinking about, BigLaw, whether it's in New York or Albany or a different location. And I was fortunate enough to know all of our panelists when they were students here and remember their journeys a little bit. So I'd like you to share that with the students. If you can talk about, did you always know you wanted to be in a big law firm? And for Arlene and Michael and Francesca, did you always know you wanted to be in New York? And then Gabriella, when it's your turn, talk about, making the decision of whether you wanted to be in a bigger city or to stay in Albany, and how you made your decisions. So Arlene, you want to start us off today with this question?
Sure,
Thanks.
absolutely. So when I started Albany Law, I was like, I just want to be a lawyer. I want to do trust and estates, and like maybe I'll go to Poughkeepsie, maybe I'll stay in Albany. Like I had no like idea where I would end up, and this is totally different than what I thought. But I think my path to Big Law and New York was, I finished my 1L year and I was in the top 10% of my class, which was also great and exciting. And so I didn't realize that all these opportunities were available to me to interview in New York and in Big Law. So I kind of went with the opportunity and prepared myself for interviews and did have a sense that I wanted to do trust in the States, but also was open to other practice areas like tax and real estate. So I figured, hey, look, there's a great financial opportunity to practice at Big Law. And I think it's pretty common that people maybe start their careers there and do it for like a couple of years and then maybe move on to something, in a more regional area or maybe in-house or something like that. So I figured like, look, I'll go, I have the opportunity. It's not going to come up again and I'll see where that finds me. So fast forward 13 years, I'm still here. And so I think having the opportunity, going and really like trying out New York City life and like the Big Law environment, it was so challenging and dynamic. And I felt like I was like getting it. And like as my summer, I was pretty successful my summer, and like 2 practice groups were like fighting over me. And then I started and they kept me on, and I just kept getting good work and it was just going really well. And so my view was, as long as it's a challenge for me and I'm enjoying the work, I'll stay. So again, 13 years later, I'm still here. I'm not in New York. I don't live in New York City anymore, but I am in New Jersey, close by. So I think that whole environment is like really exciting. And like once you get into it, it's hard to leave. I think some people call it like the golden handcuffs because the salaries are really attractive and the bonuses, if you're reasonably productive, are like very, very lucrative. So, once you start to live on that kind of lifestyle, it's hard to give up. So I haven't yet found an opportunity that would compensate me financially the way that I'm being compensated at Skadden, that also provides the work and like the challenges that and the complexity of the clients that I work with on a daily basis. So it's continued to be personally and professionally rewarding for me to be in BigLaw.
Thank you, Arlene. It seems as though when you were doing those interviews, you felt like Skadden was the right fit for you at that time, and clearly you were correct. How did you know that when you were doing all the interviews with all the different law firms? How did you decide that Skadden was the right one for you?
Sure. So yes, I did interview with a ton of firms. I had like a little spreadsheet of like factors to like weigh as to like what was really important to me. Practice area being the top one of them. The other item was there was someone who was at Albany Law who also went to Siena College where I went, who was friends with like a friend of mine. And so she was at Skadden. So she had done the same Siena, Albany Law, Skadden. And I talked to her many times and she was so helpful and just really provided kind of a sense of like, yes, you could do this. It's great here. The work is great. Like the firm is great. And so I really feel like the personal connections and kind of like the inside view that I was able to get from people that were at Albany Law that went to Skadden, and there were people at from Albany Law and other firms too, but I think I had the best connection with, I think her name was Joan. I'm forgetting her last name now. Oh, Clementi. So I feel like she really helped. And then the practice area, they actually seemed like they were looking to take someone because trust and estates, although it's like a practice you can do at any level, it's the groups in BigLaw in New York City are pretty small. So they don't always take someone. So they at least had an interest in maybe taking a summer and hiring full time. So everything kind of lined up. I had kind of like a built-in kind of semi-mentor. The practice area was great. And the best part about it was I was so prepared for all of my interviews, but somehow my Skadden interview, like I got lost in Times Square because their office is in Times Square. And I ended up being like half an hour late to my interview. And I was so flustered, and like they were like, it's fine, we'll just switch this around. And I was like, I totally blew it, like there's no way they're gonna take me. And then when they gave me an offer, like despite me being like completely flustered and half an hour late, and like I was like, okay, this is a place for me, because if I can like mess this up and they still want me, like this is gonna be a good fit. So it worked out really well.
Oh, well, I'm not going to lie. I do remember the Times Square story, and I have to be honest, I remember the spreadsheet. I remember seeing that in my office one day thinking, nobody is as organized as Arlene. So I do remember the spreadsheet. Thank you. Gabriella, would you like to tell us about, I remember when you were kind of going through, hearing about the New York City firms, thinking about Albany. Can you tell us a little bit more about your process?
Sure. So I was sort of single-minded at the beginning. I, told everyone who wanted to listen that I was a local girl. My family is in Albany. I went to Albany Law for that reason, and I wanted to stay in Albany. I wound up doing pretty well academically and had more opportunities outside of Albany that came with that. And after, being told to stay open-minded, I went and I did interviews in New York City. I interviewed at Milbank and remember receiving an offer there. And it was probably the hardest choice of my life at that point to make a decision of whether to go to New York City and go to a firm like Milbank, where, obviously I think Arlene said that these salaries are unbelievably attractive. You're going to do very well for yourself. You're going to set yourself up really well. You're going to work in New York City, which comes with obvious excitement. It's really, really enticing. In different types of work, you're going to be working for really big clients, big companies, things of that nature. So I remember I hemmed and hawed for a while. And by the time I interviewed at Milbank, they did their interviews like later on in the process. And I had already had a couple offers from local firms here. And then Whiteman had their callback interviews. And I came to Whiteman's callback. And I just had like instantly walking in the firm, I just knew. I spoke to like the receptionist, and she was the nicest person in the world, knew me, knew so much about me the second that I walked in the door. And it was clear that they were really prepared, that they took a lot of care and consideration in making you feel comfortable. And every person that I talked to, I identified with in a different way at Whiteman. I had real conversations during my interviews. It didn't feel like an interview. I felt like these were people that I had known for a long time, and that I was just having a normal conversation with. And so I really felt welcome there. And that really, it was stepping into Whiteman kind of sealed the deal for me. And I kind of didn't look back. And with that, I think it kind of came full circle. And I remembered why it was that I wanted to stay in the Albany, New York area. Primarily, my family is here. And that was number one on my list. My parents are in the area. My sibling is in the area. My husband and I just bought a house. We're like, God bless him, we're 5 minutes from his in-laws and he's totally fine with it. So it worked out for us. And that was really what I wanted. But Whiteman in specific had a lot to offer as well that made it the most attractive firm in the area for me. I wanted a full service firm. I got advice early on, even though I expressed immediate interest in doing litigation. A couple of professors at the law school had told me, if you're interested in one specific practice area, don't limit yourself by going to a firm that might only have that practice area. If you have the opportunity to go to a firm that offers a lot of different practice areas, you might learn more about how to be a litigator in different ways. I didn't really understand what that meant until I got to Whiteman. So we have litigation, but I might do a specific type of litigation that has like a corporate transactional edge to it, or labor and employment focus, because we also have a labor and employment group. So I wanted that. I wanted to sort of broaden my horizons, even though I knew that exactly what it was I wanted to do in terms of a practice area. I also wanted a firm, I wanted to be able to work for a firm in Albany that represented bigger companies and bigger institutions. I wanted to say, oh, okay, there are Fortune 500 companies on their client list, which was unique about Whiteman in this market. A lot of private firms in this market represent smaller clients. Whiteman gave me the opportunity to work on bigger files for bigger matters, which is something that I was also looking for. There are trade-offs though, right? So, the attractive BigLaw New York City salary is not something that you traditionally get at a private law firm in this area. The trade-off is, maybe a little bit more work-life balance. But I was also looking for the opportunity to have top of the market in terms of salary in this area, as well as a competitive bonus structure, which was something that was also unique about Whiteman. So a lot of the big law firms, I think Arlene was mentioning, have bonus policies that are driven by production. That was something that Whiteman also offered, so that if everyone who's in private practice is working hard, but if you wanted to have the opportunity to work a little bit harder and be rewarded by a competitive bonus structure, Whiteman offered that as well. So that's really what drove my choice to go to Whiteman. It was really about where my roots were. And it worked out for me, and I couldn't be happier.
Thank you, Gabriella. I remember when you were going through the whole process.
Yeah.
And now looking back, are you glad that you interviewed with the New York City firm? So are you glad you went through the process, even though you stayed true to what you wanted to do originally?
I am, because I didn't just interview, right? Like my experience in going through the process wasn't limited to just walking into Millbank and doing the callback interview. I made sure that I talked to other people who had gone to Millbank, who had gone to other big law firms, as well as people who had worked, Albany Law graduates, who had worked at Whiteman, who had worked at other firms that I had an interest in this area. And I learned so much about what their experiences were beyond what I learned in a callback interview. And so I am glad to have gone through that process so that I was at least fully aware of what my options were. Sometimes you don't get the full story about a firm until you talk to someone a peer or someone who's been there, and who will be transparent with you and honest with you. I heard nothing but good things about Milbank, but there were certain things that I felt when I was described the experience at Whiteman that sort of aligned with exactly what I was looking for, and it came from not necessarily a partner, but somebody that I knew, a face that I recognized from the Albany law community. I think that it's vital that you don't close off options when you're interviewing because you don't think that they're for you. I actually remember I had an offer from a firm in January of my 1L year, and I almost took it. Um, and I'm so glad that I didn't. It was litigation. It was a good firm in the area. And I was like, oh, perfect. I'm done. I'll just take that. And someone in the career center said, you're better off going through with the interviewing process, doing the BigLaw interviews, doing the other callbacks once they open up in the area with other firms. And I'm so glad that I did it. I really am.
Good, good. Michael, would you like to share your journey to BigLaw?
Sure. So yeah, when I think I had maybe a similar path that Arlene had, in the sense of when I came into law school, I wasn't maybe as sure exactly which direction I had wanted to go. When I first came in, I was thinking maybe I would be a district attorney or do something in criminal law. But similarly, kind of when I ended up after my first year, I was very highly ranked, and I saw all the opportunities that were kind of open to me, and I figured this is time to do it, and to explore it. And when I also, to be honest, I saw some of the salary differences and things like that, and seeing, what I had in front of me, I was always under the impression that if you work at BigLaw, you can kind of, go other places from that. It wasn't as linear maybe as you think it would be. So in that sense, then I looked at the opportunities out there. I interviewed with a number of firms in the city. And as far as New York City, I always wanted to be there. I live in Westchester County, New York, and although I never lived in New York City itself, I have roots in the area. I grew up here, so it made sense to stay down here and work down here, just because it had what I thought was maybe the best opportunity. And with regard to White and Case specifically, I also reached out. Actually, it's funny. I had reached out to an alumni who was at White and Case, just cold, didn't send an email, just called one day and say, hey, I'm interviewing here. Can you talk? And he took time out of his day to talk with me and kind of let me know how his experience was. And I fell in love with the people. The work was really high level work. And I knew going in, speaking to other folks who had been there and through the alumni, that the training that I was going to be getting at White and Case and then BigLaw was like nothing else you would ever experience. The level of the cases and the high profile nature of them and some of the work there would just be kind of second to none. But meeting with the people, I just felt comfortable. I said, I'm going to be spending long hours with these folks, and I wanted to get along with them personally. And the interviewing was great. One funny story from interviewing with White and Case, I remember I went in a room full of other candidates who were from Ivy League schools, and I felt they kind of went in and they had such an attitude of like, oh, they're like, I'm interviewing them, almost like I'm supposed to be here and I'm picking which one I want to work at. I had a completely different view. It's like, I got to go in here and I got to really stand up and make myself known and be confident. It was interesting to see the dichotomy between the different types of law students going in for the interviews. And I remember at one point at one of the firms, I had mentioned, they saw in my resume that I had, I wrote down something about that I had, examined or cross-examined a police officer in a case in town court in Colony, and they said, wow, and they asked me about it, and I said, wow, your law school went through a lot of trouble to do a mock examination. I said, it was an actual examination. I was in an actual courtroom. I was in it. And that really, I realized at that point that, the Ivy League students, they weren't getting that type of practical experience. And I still remember when I had started at White and Case, I was in a room with about 60 other candidates my same year, my summer. And one of the people, summer folk who's organizing the summer program, asked the question, how many of you have been in front of an actual judge? And it was me and one other person out of a class of 60, summer associates. And, me coming from Albany, and all these Ivy League students did not have, their hand raised. It was amazing for me to just see that dichotomy, and just, it really gave me the confidence, I think. And that's why I was at my firm for as long as I was, and just seeing that and knowing what Albany Law had provided, it was incredible to see.
I've heard that before, that students have, the experience that you're getting here, really does resonate, with the law firms down in the city. Michael, what do you think, what's your opinion on the role that being at White & Case played helping you make the move to MetLife and then to Prudential?
Yeah, I think it was critical. And I think, interestingly, if you look at my career path, it stands out even more. I went from being a litigation associate, commercial litigation associate for 7.5 years, and I made the move to an in-house non-litigation role, industry I had no knowledge of. I did not know anything about insurance before MetLife hired me, except that I have my own insurance. I literally knew nothing. What I was able to do was I was able to kind of sell myself on the good core skills I had developed at White & Case, right? The reading, the writing, the intensity. And that's kind of, I think, making that transition. If I had not had that background at the big law firm, I don't know that I would have been able to make as palpable of a case for myself as I did. I really viewed it as, yes, making the move in-house, there's a salary decrease. Yes, there's, different changes that are remade, but I was essentially betting on myself. And I think it kind of panned out, because now having made the move afterwards to Prudential, it was a much, the opportunity got better, the salary increase. I just think that base core skills that I received at White & Case just are second to none, and they saw it and they appreciated it. I was able to submit a writing sample of a U.S. Supreme Court brief. Incredible experience that I just think it's just it was such a phenomenal experience I had at White & Case. The people, the work, everything is just such a core base of me. I became a lawyer at White & Case. I had such good support, and such high profile cases I got to work on. I think that's really what made it so easy for me to make a change. And like I said, going from litigation, commercial litigation associate to an in-house corporate role is about as drastic as you can make. And I had never, like I said, never had an insurance client day in my life as a lawyer, but I was able to display the confidence that, yes, I can learn the industry. Yes, I can apply these skills, the good core skills, I can apply them to anything. And that, I think, just showing that I was able to make that change and that transition, as drastic as it was, I think just shows the value of having worked in big law for as long as I did.
Such a great point, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think students, at some point worry that they're going to be doing the same thing all the time. They don't realize that the skills that they're learning during these summer associate positions, whether it's in New York or Albany or Boston, really can take you to the next step. Francesca, you recently just made a move as well. So will you tell us about your journey to Cahill and then how it took you to where you are now at Mintz Levin?
Of course. So Gabriella actually said a lot of things that really resonated with me. So I'll start with saying that I was not top 10. And I think that that's really important to note for the students on this call. And Gabriella said something along the lines of, it's really vital not to close yourself off to opportunities. And I almost did an interview for a lot of the big law firms because I had just missed top 10. And I thought that the requirements were very stringent. And I remember being very anxious about it. I'm sure Joanne can corroborate that. But she was like, no, go ahead. If you get in the room with them, which you are able to get in the room with them, I think it's like top 15%, I'm not sure. But if they are willing to interview you, they are willing to actually hire you. And I wound up doing really well in callbacks. And I think that's another point, that you can have great grades, but it does come down to fit and personality and really knowing the firm. And a little show and tell, something that really helped me in like my anxious mind. Someone in the Career Center actually gave me this. And I feel very old because it's 2017 to 2018, but it was the Chambers Associate Student's Guide to Law Firms. And I even referenced it for my Mint interview because they're in here. And I would just say, use as many resources as you can to really know the firm that you're interviewing at. If they've worked on any big deals, noteworthy cases in like the last year or so, really know who you're interviewing. They don't expect you to be a lawyer, but definitely be able to ask intelligent questions, because that's what the interview does come down to. And so for me at Cahill, I originally wanted to do First Amendment litigation. I went to UAlbany, like Michael, and I studied journalism. And I thought First Amendment litigation would tie really well with my journalism background. And then I got to Cahill, and I really enjoyed my time there. And it was hard because when you're a summer associate, you're having the time of your life. But I remember I wasn't really enjoying the litigation work as much. And then I came back to school. I was a pro bono scholar. I worked at the Office of the Federal Public Defender, and that was full-time me as kind of like a litigator, essentially. And I hated it. I dreaded going to work. It really wasn't working for me. Once again, I like the environment. I like the people, great atmosphere, but the actual work, I didn't enjoy. So when I got back to Cahill in the fall, I was still in litigation, but my office mate was a corporate associate. And I started paying attention to what he was doing, and there was a lot more client interaction. Whenever he was drafting something, we would be talking about it. And it got to the point where I was more focused on what he was doing and more invested in his career than whatever was going on my computer. So I raised my hand and I spoke to a partner that I was close with, and he was like, "You can switch to corporate tomorrow." And Cahill is a very corporate leaning firm too. And once again, like Gabriella said, make sure that even if you have an idea of what you want to do, make sure that the firm that you go to does have a few other opportunities, because you never know. I never thought that I would really love capital markets. I never thought that I would even want to be a corporate associate. But there are just so many aspects of it that I really do enjoy. And I feel like the things that I liked about journalism, I do every day right now. Like I was on the phone with a director at a company, and he was explaining to me how their company works so that I can actually prepare their public filings. And stuff like that, getting into the nuts and bolts of things is what I really enjoy. And I enjoy writing. And I thought that I would enjoy litigation more. But I really didn't. So just make sure that you have a lot of opportunities. And yeah, I think that's all I have.
Thank you. I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. So I'm going to ask another one of my questions, kind of a twofold. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that I gave you ahead of time. But were there any, as you went through the process, it's a screening interview, which are now virtual. Most of you did your screening interviews in person, but since COVID, we've been doing the virtual. Then you had the callback interview, and then offer, right? So were there any misconceptions you had about BigLaw, like things that you were told that, a lot of people like to give a lot of advice, but is there anything that surprised you about the process, or any misconceptions you had? Francesca, you want to start us off this time?
So I think a few things that surprised me were how willing the Albany Law alum were to speak to me. Like Michael said, cold calling that partner. That's happened to me throughout my career multiple times. I randomly called a partner at Sidley. Joanne connected me to him because I was confused about what to do. And he stopped in the middle of his day and answered this cold call and spoke to me for half an hour. So really, I think when it comes to interviewing, if you have even like the shred of, this is not the best word, but even like a shred of arrogance or too much confidence, really just humble yourself, because there are so many things other people told me that I never would have thought about. What goes on at these law firms sometimes comes down to politics and personalities. And there are things that you just don't see and that you won't be aware of unless someone is giving you like a very unfiltered approach. And I think it even helps to talk to multiple people, as many people as you can, make a spreadsheet, have all your notes on a legal pad, because it will really help the experience. And I think too, being yourself, I think that is something that is like undervalued. And I interviewed a lot of people at Cahill. I haven't interviewed anyone at Mintz yet because I've been here for only 2 months. But when I was at Cahill, the best interviews that I had were with people who came with good questions that they actually wanted to know the answer to. So, what do you do on a deal? What's your role? Instead of making up a question about some like esoteric thing that I had done that they looked up on the website. And then I'm like watching their eyes glaze over as I'm describing something. So definitely go in, be yourself. Don't be afraid to talk about your hobbies. I think people always like talking to someone who also has a real life that they appreciate too, in addition to being a good lawyer.
Great advice, Francesca. Thank you. Michael, would you like to share with us your, any surprises you had in the process, or any misconceptions?
Yeah, I guess one of the biggest things for me is I don't know why I just thought I envisioned the interviews with the big law being scarier and more formal and more substantive than they ended up being. I think a lot of it was trying to figure out, kind of ask you questions about, how you work. They're trying to really, I think, kick the tires on you as a person, right? Because I guess what I didn't appreciate is once you get to that point, everybody pretty much is very smart. Everybody is pretty much has really good background in law school, and they're just trying to understand if you're going to be a good fit for the firm. Rather, I guess I was expecting some more, like I said, substantive pinging like we're used to in law school, but it really wasn't about that. It was more about really trying to understand you as a person. Is this someone I would want to work with? Is this someone who I would want on my team? Is this someone who knows something about the firm that's not maybe just on the websites that everyone's going to find? Did you, ask around? Do you know what we do, kind of thing? And I think, like Francesca was saying, really understanding and showing a genuine interest goes a very, very, very long way. Because like I said, at this point, you're all very smart, right? If you're interviewing at BigLaw, you're all really smart. You're all really talented people, but it's a matter of making that personal connection, I think, that, you really need to focus on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. Arlene, can you share with us?
Sure. I think to echo what Francesca said about being authentic and your genuine self, I think is something that I found to be hard to do in the beginning. Like, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. Like, I didn't go to Ivy League. Like, I'm from Albany. Like, why do they want me? But what Michael said is so right, that like you meet the criteria. If they're calling you for a screener or calling you for a callback, you are qualified to take this job. And it really is about fit. And I think, it is, are you a good fit for the firm? But is the firm a good fit for you? Because, as attractive as BigLaw is with the salaries and like, all the high clients and stuff, it's like, it is a lot of work. It is going to be most of your time and energy. And it is very exhausting. Like everybody works hard, but this is like a very intense environment. And I think you really want to end up place somewhere, particularly on your first try, that is a good fit for you, that you could stay, and like the work is going to be excellent across the board. Like the salaries are generally matched, but like the people that you work with, like the tone of the environment. Like I remember there was one firm that I interviewed with. I think I did yeah, it was a callback, and the partner, like I was sitting in the waiting area and a partner came out and like beckoned somebody who's like, hey, come over here. And like the person just like followed them like a dog. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is how they treat people like out in the open. Like, I obviously was like dressed like I was here to interview. So like, if they weren't gonna hide their like disdain for people, like when kids are coming to interview, like what's it like when you actually work here? So, to the extent there are still in-person interviews, like I would kind of keep eyes peeled for things like that, or like do people keep their doors open? I guess with COVID, it's obviously a very different dynamic, but just like, when you interview someone, do they have pictures of their family or pets? Like, are they like whole people, or are they just like, I work and I have nothing else outside? Like, that's not a good indication of how like the firm values people as like whole people and not just employees. So I would say, and I've taken that with me as I like get more senior too, is just like, look, there's a way that a lot of people do this and they are successful, but like you kind of also need to do it in a way that's like authentic to you. And like, if they're not going to hire you because you're married or you have kids or like you pet, like whatever, if they're going to dismiss you based on that, like they're kind of doing you a favor, because that's not a place you want to be. So I wouldn't take any rejection as a personal reflection on you, I would take it as, okay, like this opportunity was not one that was meant to be, and move on and go for something that you end up with a better fit long term. Because your career is like long and you're going to have a lot of moves along the way. So it's best to end up in the right place versus just, like whoever pays you the most or whatever.
Thank you, Arlene. I do always say that every firm has personality and every student has personality, and it's, making that fit. So you've brought up some great points. Gabriella, can you share with us anything that surprised you or any misconceptions you had?
Yeah, so I thought interviewing at a big law firm or a firm like Whiteman would be really scary. I was ready to get thrown hypotheticals every which way. I was trying to think up the wildest questions that I would get asked, and I honestly couldn't have had a more different experience than what I expected. That never happened. I don't know if that happened to anyone on this call, but I never got thrown a legal hypothetical of how I would address something in the real world. That just didn't happen for me. With that, though, I had this expectation that the interviewing process really needed to be rigid and it was formal and I can only really speak when spoken to type of thing. And I quickly learned that that's not a good interview. And if you're getting the feel when you walk into a place that that's how you need to act, then that's probably not the place for you. I learned quickly that it was okay for me to ask the questions that I wanted the answers to in order for me to determine if it was really the right fit. So I expressed what my goals were really early on in the interviewing process to firms. I would ask, if I come to work here, you have litigation. Can I do litigation? Can I be a litigation associate? A couple firms said, no, we'll tell you what you do. And I didn't want that. I wanted a firm to say, yes, we're looking for litigation associates right now. We have a need, because I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I knew, for instance, that big law firms offer the opportunity to do a federal pro bono trial, right? As a younger litigation associate, that was something I was really interested in. And I asked firms in this area, is that something that I could do? A lot of firms said, no, we don't have the resources for that. Whiteman said, yes, you can do that. I wound up doing it this year. So there were very specific goals that I had in mind that I wanted to accomplish. And I asked questions tailored to those goals to figure out if that was the type of firm where I could accomplish them, because sometimes it just might not be. The other thing too, someone once told me to view an interview like a basketball game. There's a point in the game that you always get past the ball, and the person who passes it to you is looking to see if you could pick it up and run with it. So what that really amounts to in an interview is if somebody in an ordinary day-to-day conversation says to you, hey, how have you been? How's your family? You answer the question. And then most times you say back to them, how are you? How's your family? There's engaging in an interview that a lot of people forget to do because they're so nervous. So be mindful of that moment in an interview when you do get past the ball, and be ready to pick it up and be ready to actually be a person and talk. Like Arlene said, you want to see if there are whole human beings at the place that you're working at. They also want to see if you're a whole human being, and they can have a conversation with you outside of just talking about law or a career or something along those lines. So that's my advice.
Thank you so much, and it's great advice, so I appreciate it so much. Students that are on the call, I know we have a few. I'd like to open up to, for you to ask any questions to any of our panelists. Does anybody have any questions? You can feel free to unmute and just talk.
I just had a question in regards to, I feel like I haven't fully decided yet if I want to be down in the city. I know a few of you had said just to take on those interviews if you do have the opportunity to do so. But do you guys, in general, this is just a general question, but do you guys feel that is there possibility for movement to go from a smaller firm that then goes into big law at some point? Or is it one of those things where you kind of have to start big law and then you have the opportunity movement wise and whatnot? Sorry, I don't know if that totally made sense, but.
It's a great question, Mariah. Would any of our panelists like to start?
I can. I actually think today, now more than ever, I do think there's an opportunity to transition if you start at a firm like in Albany, New York, right? At a firm like Whiteman, Osterman and Hanna, or a Bond Schenek, or a Greenberg Traurig, or a Harris Beach. With how the market is today and the availability of remote work options, increasingly now more than ever, associates that I know of in this area are getting pinged by BigLaw offices. That I have seen increasingly in the last 2 years. That wasn't necessarily the case when I graduated in 2017, but now more than ever, that is the case. And there are associates from my firm, from other firms that I'm aware of in the area who have lateraled in the last 2 years to right into big law firms from this region. So I definitely think it is a possibility.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
And Gabriella's right. The market right now, especially the lateral market, is very, very hot right now. I think lateral hiring is up 111%. It was the number I was given when we were at a conference recently. In years past, getting into big law, it was through the summer associate program, and as a 2L, you are always the most marketable for these, applications now. And in the past, when our panelists went through the process, there weren't a lot of opportunities for 3Ls to join big law. There is some movement now, and it all depends on how the market, stays its course. But thank you, Mariah. That was a great question. Any other questions?
Just add?
Oh, yes.
Sorry. I was going to add. I do think the lateral market is really hot, and I think there is a lot of opportunity. But I think, because I've interviewed a lot of prospective candidates, I feel like it's harder. The interview process is a little harder as a lateral than it is a summer. Everything we just said about they want to see if you're a good fit, it's less substantive. I feel like that's not as true when you're interviewing as a lateral. So I do think it's easier. It's a much easier entry point as a 2L into big law than later. There's going to be a lot more factors at play. Who left, what job are they replacing? You know what I mean? There's a lot more at play. So I would say if you have an interest, I would try the big law. You could always leave, and a lot of people do leave. It's very common. So I think my personal advice would be maybe try the big law first and then go from there versus the other way. Just to have the most flexibility. It's just my two.
I just want to echo that because I did recently do the lateral process. While my law school interviews were definitely more personality based and more of conversations, the lateral process, I had to be prepared to talk about any deal on my deal sheet at any point, and I was asked substantive questions and asked to give substantive examples of documents that I had drafted, things that I had worked on. So I do think it is easier. I think Michael said this on the call earlier too, that just starting in big law allows you to have all of these other options. So I think if you do have the opportunity to interview, like Arlene just said, you can always leave. It's very common. It's a difficult industry to work in, so no one's going to fault you. But I think if you have the opportunity, it's always great to start.
Anyone else want to add anything to that? Mariah or Justine, any other questions for our panelists?
No, I guess the only thing I have is I don't know what focus I want to do yet, and I'm in a different spot because I am actually a January start 2-year student. So I have to interview after having one semester and being in my second semester. So I don't really know my concentration yet, and I'm a little nervous on how to talk to these law firms when I literally just started 7 months prior to talking to them.
That is a great question, Justine. And for our panelists, we've recently developed programs where students actually start in the middle of the year. So they start in January during the second semester. So they have only one semester. But I think your question also resonates to other students, right, who have 2 semesters, who still don't know what they want to practice. They don't know if they really want to do corporate or litigation, transactional work. So is there any one of our panelists who'd like to address Justine's question?
Yeah, I can. When I summered at White and Case, the way they structured their summer was they allowed you. I think you did 3 rotations. So I did a rotation in litigation, and then I did a rotation in M&A, and then so they allowed us. I don't know if that's still the case, but they allowed us to kind of try different. And even if you came in saying, "Hey, I want to be a litigator," that's all I want to do. They still required you to kind of work in different areas of the firm. And then at the end, they kind of, made an offer to you, I think maybe in one of the specific areas for you to start. But I don't remember it being as rigid as, you need to come on as a summer associate for XYZ part of the firm, at least in BigLaw.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I totally agree with Michael. My firm, I think you rank 3 areas and they try to get you like mentors and assignments in that, but you're not tied to any practice group during the summer. And then even when you get an offer to come in, you do, I think, 2 or 3 rotations if you're corporate in different corporate groups. I'm not sure what it is on litigation, but there's like general litigation and like subsets. So, I can offer that. It's fine that you don't know what you want to do. I think it's kind of hard to know what you want to do because you're in law school, you're not practicing, and practicing is very different from what we learn. So I think that having a lot of flexibility in what you're interested in is helpful in the summer program in particular, because they may have like overhired for corporate and they need a ton of litigation people. But if you come in saying like, I only want to do corporate, it might be harder for you to find a spot if they know you're not going to like it. I'll just offer that I was like adamant that I wanted to trust in the states, and I was like, trust in the states, trust in the states. It worked out for me, but there are plenty of firms that were like, we can't offer you a spot in that. Like, there's no guarantee. And so even though I really liked the firm, like it wasn't a good fit for me because they didn't have it. And what happened if I hated trust in the states? I never practiced it. So I think it's good to be flexible and just say like, you're really excited, you're open to learning different areas, and they're, you haven't made a decision which one you're in, but you're open to trying projects and refining that interest over your summer.
Thank you so much. I want to be respectful of our alumni's time, and we're just about done. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. I think they all gave such great advice, and one of the common themes that we heard across the board is to utilize our alumni, to utilize the people on this screen and other alumni who are at the firms, because I think you can learn a lot about what a firm does and maybe what practice areas they're really looking to fill at this time. So please join me in thanking our panelists today. For our students on the call, we are conducting mock interviews this week at night. If you haven't signed up for a spot, I strongly encourage you to do so. I've had each of these our panelists do mock interviews before, and they know that they are very helpful. So that's my little plug for the mock interview program this week. Michael, Arlene, Gabriella, Francesca, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy days to join us today.
Welcome. Thank you for having them.
Welcome. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank